Hello, and welcome back to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. On September 26th, 2018, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 1991 Best Picture race, where we discussed Bugsy as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to The Silence of the Lambs. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really JFK? Hello, and welcome back to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we discuss another film nominated for Best Picture that we did not cover as the runner-up in the main show. And today we're talking 1991. And, of course, that was the Best Picture winner, The Silence of the Lambs. On the regular show, I covered Bugsy as the runner-up, but here we are pondering the question, could it have been JFK as the runner-up? And I think there could be a good, healthy discussion. I think this is very much one that's up for debate. So, joining me today, I have two fabulous returning guests. First of all, you heard him talking Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the films of 1966, as well as an episode of On Second Thought on Capote. From the fabulous This Had Oscar Buzz podcast, welcome back, Chris Feil.
I am still the Earth Mother, and I still think none of you are flops.
Oh, that means so much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, yes. And you heard my other guests talking La La Land in the films of 2016, Network in the films of 1976, and some episodes of On Second Thought about The Big Short and Milk, plus an episode of How Did They Win, where you heard him defend Art Carney and Harry and Tonto. My colleague at Gold Derby, Charlie Bright.
Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
The original Beyonce's Irreplaceable.
Yes, there we go. Glad
Has
to
anyone
have
made
you
a
both
remix
back.
of that to Beyonce's Irreplaceable? Because if someone has it, that's a missed opportunity.
It seems like the type of thoroughly unwell thing that the internet has somewhere.
That's true. Some deep corner of the internet. All right, so speaking of deep corners of the internet and conspiracies, today we're talking about JFK. So, shall we jump into a summary? There's a lot to cover here. All right.
The movie is mostly summary. It's just summary of thousands and thousands of documents.
Yes. So, JFK is a political thriller docudrama that follows a theory about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and we meet Jim Garrison, who is the district attorney of New Orleans, who investigates who might have been responsible. Lee Harvey Oswald is suspected, but soon is killed, and so Garrison closes the investigation, but then he reopens the case after he finds some inaccuracies in the Warren report. And this all leads to Garrison and his team trying to untangle a web of people who may have been involved in the assassination in this big conspiracy that might just include the CIA, the Mafia, and many other big organizations. So, the film was directed by Oliver Stone, who co-wrote the screenplay with Zachary Sklar, and it stars pretty much everyone in Hollywood. We have Kevin Costner as Garrison, Tommy Lee Jones, Kevin Bacon, Gary Oldman, Laurie Metcalf, Michael Rooker, J.O. Sanders, Sissy Spacek, Joe Pesci, Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, John Candy, Donald Sutherland, Vincent D'Onofrio, a gigantic ensemble, and I didn't even get to half of them. Maybe we'll talk about more of them later.
Kirkland.
Sally Kirkland in a little cameo at the beginning. Okay, so JFK made $70 million at the U.S. box office, was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, winning 2, but not Best Picture. Okay, so JFK is almost 30 years old now. I know the two of you have different experiences with this film, and I'm interested to see where we fall here. So let's start with Chris. So, Chris, what is your relationship to JFK, and what are your general thoughts on the movie, not the president?
Oh, okay. I mean, I was not alive for the president. I was barely alive for the movie. I'd only actually recently seen it for the first time, I think maybe a year or so ago, and I'm pretty sure the first time I watched it, I watched the director's cut, which is like 3.5 hours long instead of just, notched over 3 hours. And that time I was really kind of blown away by it. Watching it now, I don't know if quarantine has given me significantly less patience or something. I liked it a good deal less, but I still think it's great. As someone who does not typically like Kevin Costner as an actor, I think he's incredible in this movie. I think the movie is kind of just mind-blowing in the construction of it and the style of it. I think some of the messaging gets a little muddied when Oliver Stone tries to make it kind of this Capra-esque version of like a conspiracy movie. And like when this movie really kind of locks in for me is largely because of Donald Sutherland. I love Donald Sutherland in this movie. I love Donald Sutherland, period. Yeah, I think it's a really good movie. In terms of like where it fell in Oscar, I could buy it as a third place and as a second place. I think it was probably really close with this and Bugsy for second place.
Mm-hmm.
That
Fair
would be
enough. Yeah, we'll get to more of your thoughts later on that. So Charlie, how about you?
Well, it's interesting to see this movie, and I watched it for the first time last night, and I think one of the first things that I found myself thinking as I watched the movie was, how films can feel. Because I wonder if my opinion on this movie would have been any different had I first seen it prior to, say, 2015. Because of, how, conspiracy theories have always been a part of discourse, but now it feels like they're on a completely different level. But with regards to the movie itself, I think it's one of the best cases of how great a storyteller Oliver Stone can be. He really takes his time in constructing this narrative and really making it, feel eye-opening and horrifying at the same time when you realize the end result that he's getting towards. I think the editing is just absolutely just breathtaking to see, and of course the cast list, the performances are all great. I think I'm a bit higher on Kevin Costner as an actor. I've actually thoroughly enjoyed a lot of his performances, and I think this one is no different. I think he's fantastic in this movie. And but when you get beyond that, you get to some other aspects of this that I'm sure we'll go into later. But overall, it is a very, very, very entertaining movie. And overall, I think pretty good.
Okay. So for myself, I have seen it before. I remember really liking it or at least respecting it. But there's so much movie here that I remembered some stuff and just completely forgot some other stuff. And watching it again a few days ago, I can't say I was looking forward to it just because it is a big time commitment. First of all, 3+ hours. And I feel like you sort of have to be in the right mindset to really give yourself over to this movie, because it does leave you, I think, as exhausted as the main character in the film. So it's a real long and almost like stressful journey, even though it's not like a traditional thriller so much. There's just something about seeing someone become so obsessed with figuring out the truth and uncovering conspiracies and not even really being able to prove the conspiracies that just, I don't know, it takes a lot out of you. Maybe that's just me. And I think the film being as long as it is, as much as it might be a turnoff for some people, I think it's one of the clearer examples for me of its genre that actually reflects kind of some of the really painstaking steps of being in the business of finding out the truth, you know, whether that's a district attorney or a journalist or anyone like that who's doing their best to figure things out at the risk of like icing out your own family and then having them fight back and dealing with the stress of what he's doing professionally and also his life at home, never really having a break, you know, always thinking about it, leaving on Easter Sunday to meet a suspect, just being so consumed by this one thing. And part of me does wish that the film did actually dwell a bit more on the toll that it's taking on Garrison, but I do think Kevin Costner is able to really convey that through certain scenes, just how exhausted he is and also how exhausting he is to certain people. Doesn't get the Oscar nomination here, but I do want to sort of dive down more on this performance and why it seems like we all think it works really well for this film.
I mean, there's so much that's kind of building to his closing statements in the final courtroom scenes of the movie, and like in a way that I almost kind of wish there was less of the family dynamic, because I think you get it through his performance elsewhere in the movie that it is taking a personal toll, and like the kind of slow build of the personal toll it's taken to where he has this kind of very repressed emotionality that he's trying to not let out, but it's like kind of seeping through in a way that he can't control when he's giving his closing statements. I also just kind of hate how sidelined Sissy Spacek is in this movie.
Yeah,
I love Sissy Spacek, and like I think in the ways that his home life and the personal toll exists on like the fringes of Kevin Costner's performance when, you know, they're dealing with documents and conspiracy and explanations and like these reams and reams of pages of monologue throughout. I think he tells that in his physicality, in, you know, his just like very nuanced mannerisms, that it is taking a personal toll on him throughout the movie. And I think that kind of speaks to the power of what he's doing in a really subtle way.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I think there's always something fascinating in watching a performance of someone who's so convinced of who's so grounded in their convictions of what they're doing, even when it's to the detriment of so many other people. I think those are always fascinating performances to watch, and I think Costner is probably one of the great examples of that in this movie. I would piggyback on the whole thing that you just said, Chris, about Sissy Spacek being sidelined. The one of the things that actually worked against me with this movie, in terms of how his family is portrayed, is at first we see that, you know, his wife is just disturbed by how far he's dived down this rabbit hole. But then we also see how it's affecting, how it's branching into threats against the family, and that's obviously, it causes her to understandably almost lose it. But then it's so weird how, first of all, this is just me nitpicking, but after the kids have been threatened, he brings them out to the front porch, which is just such a, like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense, other than the purpose of Oliver Stone decided we have to have an Atticus Finch moment here.
Yeah.
And it's also just this dynamic, too, that we've seen and been equally, sometimes more, frustrated in 1,000 other movies. So it's like that's a really frustrating note, or all of those scenes were frustrating for me.
But the one that really, that to me is even a more egregious example of this, is when he sees the RFK assassination, and he goes up to his wife who's sleeping and goes, they killed him, they killed the other Kennedy.
Yeah, and they get horny for the assassination, I guess.
Well, it's not just that, but it's also like, instead of her going, you are dealing with forces that are greater than you could ever imagine, and you are putting your family in danger, she automatically comes to his side. Like, that's the thing that causes her to go, oh, you are right, so everything you're doing is okay, even if it's at the expense of our family's safety.
Yes. By the way, that
strange.
like hypothetical thing that Sissy Spacek could have said just reminds me of, like, speaking, Charlie, of Network. I'm just picturing her being like, "You are dealing with the primal forces of nature." Yeah. So, anyway, I just would have liked to have seen more of Sissy Spacek because she's an incredibly talented actress, and here she's kind of just in, to use a modern example, just the clairvoyant first man, like, you're all a bunch of boys mode, which is fine. But
yeah, she really doesn't even get that much agency in the movie other than
that's true.
having the fight scene with her husband.
And having
I was
going to
say that or Amy Adams in Vice.
Yes. Yeah, I just think it's sort of a waste of her talent, even though I think she does make the most of it with some great wigs. But going to the rest of the cast, there's truly too many to name. Sally Kirkland, let's just start from the beginning. Oscar nominee, shows up at the very beginning of this film as this woman who's screaming about how Kennedy is going to be assassinated. Fun.
The transition between, like, actual stock footage to the film itself, so it's like Oliver Stone blurring the lines between fiction and reality, and
Yes. Which I do really think is very well done, because there's a lot of visual language changes throughout the film, even within one scene, let alone the transitions. So, I think that could run the risk of being like, what are we doing here? This seems a little muddled, but I do think it weirdly is sort of metatextual, I guess, in a way, in sort of just blending fact and fiction, and I think that's something that is almost prescient with like people who will watch JFK now. I think maybe could appreciate it on a deeper level just because of how much conspiracy theory talk there is out there, and like I said, the whole blending of different theories.
It's sometimes a thing where you don't really know what you're looking at, especially the footage of Gary Oldman as Lee Harvey Oswald is incredibly convincing footage as well. And his performance is kind of spooky if you go back and look at some of the footage of Lee Harvey Oswald or the photos as well. It's also this thing that I think maybe affected my performance of watching it this time. I hadn't seen Natural Born Killers the first time I'd seen JFK, and I had this year for my own podcast, and it's kind of to the nth degree of in Natural Born Killers, where it's like that but throwing acid on it in this way that's really technically impressive, even though that movie has its own host of problems. So it sounds crazy, but it seems all of that you're describing is very, like, minor key comparatively in JFK, but is still very impressive.
Unfortunately, Tommy Lee Jones is the only one who gets an Oscar nomination from this large cast. Chris, you already mentioned Donald Sutherland. I think I really want to...
Great.
We have to stop down on the incredible underratedness of Donald Sutherland, as always. That monologue in the middle of this film, or like 2/3 into this film, where he just lays it all out about all of these different forces in the world, how they're all connected, the CIA, the mafia, the members of government, just so many different groups. I think he delivers that so well in that sort of Donald Sutherland gravitas way, where you do kind of see where he's coming from and you sort of end up believing him, but there's also, like, for me, I guess, that slight hint that he might just be full of shit. Like, it's just so much to throw at you.
This is like a weird technical thing about his performance too, and maybe it just makes me sound like a dumb viewer or whatever, but half of this movie, some of these things are so complex, and they're talking about entities that you don't fully, like, unless you know all about these cases or you are very well versed in, American government and institutions, like, you don't always understand what people are saying, or like the minutiae or the details, and you feel like one of the things I'm impressed by Donald Sutherland is I understand every word that comes out of his mouth.
Yes.
Like, I can track the detail of it, and like, I don't want to say facts, but like you can understand the institutional information he's communicating. And for a movie like this, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I think there's also just the it's also his delivery and how he and the way that he delivers it. Because usually when you think of someone who's personifying the character of the whistleblower or the person who knows where all the bodies are buried, usually it's someone who is at their wits' end. They're panicking. They're paranoid about everything. They're always looking over their shoulder. But with Sutherland's performance, it's a quiet calm of knowing what he knows, but also knowing how to convey the information and being very sure of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what made that performance not just all the more effective, but also just all the more frightening when you're considering the claims that he's making.
Yeah, the whole sequence is like really like methodically constructed and like in a way that's really impactful. But I think he brings a certain energy to the movie at a certain time in the movie that completely shifts everything. And I think that's quite an achievement for a movie with a cast this large, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I think that
it feels like up to that point it's sort of like hitting dead ends, and like it's a little disorganized, and the editing is still very fast paced. But I feel like even though that sequence with Donald Sutherland has, the cutting in between and like the black and white hypothetical dealings in between his monologue, I do think it sort of just slows down a bit at that point, and it feels a lot more coherent because of his performance and the way he's delivering it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tommy Lee Jones, though, I want to hear what you guys think about Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, to me, my perspective is like, obviously there was a building narrative for Tommy Lee Jones. He eventually wins for The Fugitive. So it's like, it feels like it's more the right actor in the right movie than anything to do with the performance itself. But like, there's a lot of controversy about this performance.
I'm on the same page as that. It feels weird when you watch this movie to see that he's the lone acting representative, especially with how deep a field you had of supporting actors in that movie. He's good. I mean, I think he's good, but by no means would he probably even be in my top 5 of if I had to rank a supporting actor performances in that movie. I liked him, but it felt like that was again just like what you were saying, Chris. Right performance, right time. When that showed that this city, that Hollywood was really eager to give Tommy Lee Jones his due as an actor. When I personally think that Joe Pesci, Michael Rooker, Kevin Bacon even, and Donald Sutherland. Hell, even Joe Pesci's wig, I think, would probably have been more deserving.
Those eyebrows. Yeah.
Yeah, those eyebrows, yeah.
It's a look. Thank you for listening to this preview of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup.is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, a Slack channel, and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.